Hey, Pinchas here. Just wanted to share a quick video with you. I was in the middle of a lecture explaining to my students the call of Moses, describing that burning bush experience, and they asked me a question about God's name and how God revealed himself. So in this video, I'll go just off the top of my head for a few minutes about God's name, about Yahweh, Jehovah, and the pronouncing of God's name and what it's all about and how it came to be. If you're curious, keep watching.
So Moses has a call narrative that is very, very powerful. In fact, it is during this call narrative that we get the name of God. Okay? So a lot of times people sort of say, focus on this idea of God's name. In fact, both of the textbooks, that we're looking at are using God's name, and they call the name Yahweh, right? So you've read this. You've read this in your main textbook. The author talks about God being named Yahweh. And so did Matthews. Matthews keeps using the name Yahweh. I don't know if you notice or not, I don't use that name. And there's reasons why. Because essentially it is a name that was made up by scholars in the 20th and 21st century. It did not really exist prior to that. I guess I'm more traditional, and I simply do not use God's name. That's how I grew up. That's how I was raised. Out of respect, I just call him God, or I call him Lord. But his personal name is not possible to know because it's not spelled out in Hebrew. When you read Hebrew, in the original text, in the ancient scrolls, there are no vowels. So all you have is 4 consonants. You have Hebrew letter Yod, Hebrew letter Hey, Hebrew letter Vav, and another Hebrew letter Hey. All those are consonants, no vowels. And so nobody really knows what vowels go in between those consonants. The scholars have extrapolated the vowels that they believe go in between those consonants, and that's how they come up with the name Yahweh. Okay, but they don't know. They actually are guessing, essentially, and it's an educated guess, but it's still a guess. So when God revealed his name to Moses, the record that we have does not have vowels. It only has consonants. And so the only way we can know these things is by tradition. And tradition has been not to pronounce God's name so that not to dishonor it, essentially. Anyway, there are different perspectives on God's name. So if you ever wonder why I'm not using the name Yahweh as I teach and I lecture, I guess I'm a bit more traditional in that sense, that try to be respectful by not trying to use a name which I'm not even sure is a real name. It's kind of a made-up name, let's put it that way. For thousands of years, Christians called God's name Jehovah, until the scholars later came up with, oh, that's not how it's pronounced, that's pronounced Yahweh. But Christians used the name Jehovah, and the reason why Christians use the name Jehovah is because eventually the Hebrew scribes invented vowel markings. You see, Hebrew language is a consonantal language. It has consonants which are part of the alphabet. The alphabet is made of only consonants, and vowels exist, but vowels are not part of the alphabet. Vowels only implied. You can read Hebrew without vowels all the time. In fact, if you were to travel to Israel and you see a road sign or a billboard, it's not going to be written with vowels. It's going to be written in consonants only. And because you know the context, you will be able to understand what those words are. You can read English without vowels too, by the way. Essentially what happened is, when the scribes came up with the vowel markings, they made them up. And they made them up anywhere probably around 5th century, maybe 8th century of the Common Era. So we're talking about there's no vowels in Hebrew till about year 500 or maybe 800 of the Common Era. So imagine that. 500 years after Jesus, the scribes come up with some squigglies to represent A-E-I-O-U. Okay, that's what they did. And there's a reason why they did that, is because many people are forgetting how to pronounce the text correctly. So what they did is they placed the vowel markings above and below the original letters. And when they did that, they took the vowels from Hebrew word Adonai, which means Lord, and they placed those vowels over the name of God. Okay, the four-letter name of God, Yod He Vav He. So they actually took vowels from one word and placed them into another word. And the reason why they did that is because every time people come to God's name, they do need to say something, right? They can't just leave it out. So they said, we're going to put a mnemonic device. We're going to put a little code in there. And the code is this: when you see this word, say this word. So they put the vowels from one word and attach them to consonants from another word as a device to remind everybody that you're not supposed to pronounce the name of God. You're just supposed to substitute it with the name Lord. Okay? That's why they took the vowels from the word Lord. So when they did that, of course, Christians who read those texts later on did not know this. They didn't know this tradition. They actually thought that's how God's name was pronounced. So they pronounced God's name taking the consonants that are original with the vowels that were fake. And that's how the name Jehovah came to be, because those vowels are from the word Adonai. When Christians at some point in history, well, around 2nd century, lost their connection to Jewish culture and to Hebrew language, when Jerome translated the Bible into Latin, he studied Hebrew, but he had to go way out of his way to study Hebrew, because in their own community, within Christian community, there were nobody that could teach him. He had to go outside of the Christian community to learn Hebrew, basically, so that he can translate the Bible into Latin. So that tells you that basically Hebrew was a lost language for Christians for the most part. And after Latin Bible came to be, nobody cared about Hebrew for a long time, probably not until the days of the Reformation, which is when Christians started to renew their commitment to Hebrew because they wanted to study the original text. And that's when the name Jehovah really came to be, because they realized that the name actually has vowels, and they pronounced it the way they read it, the way they saw it, without realizing the tradition that Jews have basically planted in that word. And so that's how that whole name came to be, let's put it that way. So that became the way of pronouncing God's name for a long time, until the scholars came up with this new way, saying Yahweh. Okay, neither one are precise or arrived at, with any sort of evidence. They're just guesses. The Jehovah, we know for a fact, is fake, because the vowels are from one word and the consonants from another. That's never going to work. But Yahweh is just a scholarly extrapolation, which they hope to be true, but we have no way of confirming that. So, and in Jewish culture, the name has not been pronounced audibly, so there's no way for people to know. Only the priests are the ones who pronounced it in Jerusalem temple, and only really a couple of times per year, and that's it. So when the temple is destroyed and the priesthood is scattered, that tradition goes into complete loss. And so I don't think nobody has retained that, because there would be no purpose or reason for that name to be pronounced anymore. It was only pronounced during a ceremonies at the temple. And when it was pronounced, the pronunciation of that name was drowned out by the sound of the trumpets. So even the people could not hear the name. Imagine that. As I am praying a special prayer, at the moment of me saying God's name, the trumpets blast, and nobody could hear it except God. Because God can make out his name with a noise, right? And I know what it is, but you don't get to know it. If you come and you observe the sacrifice, you still walk away not knowing the name of God. So that way, I actually accomplished both goals. I protected God's name from you misusing it later, and at the same time, I still spoke it as God commanded for us to speak his name, in prayer. So anyway, it's a complicated and long tradition when it comes to God's name, but it's worthwhile sort of say knowing about it. People are really focused and kind of zeroed in on having to pronounce God's name, but Jews have lived without it for thousands of years and still goes on, and it's not a problem. So somehow we have no problem with addressing our earthly parents with a way of respect. We would never say their actual name. We would address them by their title, mom, dad, something like that. Those are their titles. But for some reason, when it comes to God, we have to say it with his personal name. We can't just be happy with calling him Lord or God. Like that, we got to be able to say his name. I'm like, we don't do that with our earthly parents. So why such a big difference? Anyway, we have a little double standard going on here, is what I'm trying to say. If that works with our earthly parents, it should work with God. So that's my perspective on it.